All of Truman Capote's high society swans lived in a precarious world of glamour and secrets, but none fit that description more intensely than Ann Woodward. The woman once hailed as a radiant beauty and soon faded to become a tragic, cautionary tale. Imagine a girl born under far humbler circumstances in Kansas, 1915, who reinvented herself so thoroughly that she mingled with the cream of New York high society, only to end her days under the darkest of shadows. This is the story of a striving soul who once dreamed of being someone, anyone, other than who she was, and in doing so, lost everything in the dizzying pursuit of acceptance at the very top of the social pyramid. She was born Evangeline Crowell, although perhaps even that name changed slightly. From the earliest days of her life, she longed to escape the dusty Midwestern environment that surrounded her. The pursuit of a grander life tugged at her from the moment she was old enough to realize there were wealthier, shinier, far more intriguing places beyond Kansas's borders. You can imagine a young Anne dreaming under the open plains, scanning pictures of socialites in the newspapers, or listening to glamorous voices on the radio, quietly promising herself that someday she would join their ranks. Moving to New York was her biggest leap of faith, and she arrived brimming with ambition at a time when the city was itself a chaotic, pulsating beacon of opportunity. She possessed striking looks and undeniable magnetism. John Robert Powers, who ran a famous modeling agency, supposedly noticed her early on, or so the rumor went. With a face that photographs adored and a voice that had a certain smoky charm, Anne swiftly found her way into radio gigs, acquiring a new moniker, the most beautiful girl in radio. It was a vanity label that might seem laughable now, but back then, when radio dramas and personalities commanded huge audiences, it was an asset that could potentially open every door she craved. However, despite these initial forays into show business, she never truly broke through to national stardom. Her success, by all accounts, was more of a flicker than a sustained flame. So in search of more lucrative opportunities and determined to maintain an ever-growing taste for luxury, she ended up as a showgirl at Fife's Monte Carlo, one of those glittery night spots where wealthy patrons descended to be entertained by beautiful women who themselves hoped to be discovered or rescued. That's when the first major twist happened. She came into the orbit of banker William Woodward Sr. He was older, powerful, and deeply embedded in an old-money American family. If you can picture it, a sophisticated gentleman dressed in tailored suits swirling a cocktail in a private lounge, taking a keen interest in this captivating showgirl who seemed to sparkle under the club's lights. There are rumors, so many rumors, that he whisked her into his orbit with the explicit aim of pairing her with his only son, William Billy Woodward Jr. The gossip was that Anne was effectively gifted away, passed on to the younger Woodward as a convenient romantic accessory. It's a bizarre notion, conjuring images of a man handing off a prized possession with a nod and a wink, as though relationships can be orchestrated like business deals. If that's how it truly transpired, it would foreshadow a life story shaped by transaction, appearance, and social maneuvering rather than genuine affection. Billy Woodward Jr., for all his fortune and pedigree, might have been transfixed by Anne's unique brand of grit, good looks, and ambition, but the moment society circles discovered their romance, the rumors pivoted against her. She was quickly labeled a shameless gold digger, someone who had used her wiles to ensnare a wealthy heir. It's hard to exaggerate how rigid New York's upper crust could be about who belonged and who didn't. Billy's mother, Elizabeth Woodward, notoriously disliked Anne from the get-go, viewing her as a social climbing showgirl. One can picture Elizabeth's aristocratic friends nodding in agreement, whispering behind fans at lavish parties, speculating on whether Anne was simply an opportunist or even something worse. Nevertheless, Billy married her, and Anne officially became a Woodward, stepping into a realm of unimaginable wealth and equally unimaginable scrutiny. From the outside, this might have looked like a Cinderella story, a small-town girl capturing the heart of a blue-blooded prince, living in one of America's most esteemed families. However, acceptance proved harder to secure than a marriage license. High society seemed determined to test her. She had to master table etiquette, keep conversation lively without revealing her more modest upbringing, and dress in the refined, subdued style that signaled old money instead of new. She worked tirelessly to learn how to hold her teacup at the correct angle, how to modulate her tone when speaking to titled guests, how to discern the difference between a fish fork and a dessert fork. Behind the scenes, it was exhausting, but Anne was resolute. She wasn't going to be cast aside. She had secured a seat at the table and intended to keep it. In that era, the rarefied social scene of Manhattan was dominated by Capote's legendary swans, a group of elite, immaculately turned-out women who enthralled everyone around them. There was Babe Paley, known for an elegance so effortless it sent the press into raptures. There was Slim Keith, with a casually chic air that made her seem like the blueprint for refined American aristocracy. And scattered around them were a select group of other ladies who commanded invitations to the best parties and clubs, women who regularly graced the pages of Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. These were the most rarefied circles imaginable, and Anne was determined to gain entry. But for an outsider from Kansas who had once danced in a nightclub for tips, acceptance didn't come easy. People said she tried too hard, that her accent sometimes slipped, that her manners were too studied. Rumors swirled that the swans only tolerated her presence out of courtesy to Billy, or to avoid making a scene. Anne had to consistently hustle to maintain her precarious position. On the surface, Anne and Billy lived a life of lavish soirees, vacation homes, and endless galas. But behind closed doors, their marriage was a battlefield. They fought constantly, and their spats were loud enough that gossip columnists pounced on any whiff of fresh scandal. Allegations of infidelity plagued the union from both sides. Billy, with the confidence and perhaps the arrogance born of lifelong wealth, took mistresses. Anne, refusing to be cast as the hapless victim, also engaged in affairs. Their mutual betrayals fueled the rumor mill, and the tension was thick enough that even acquaintances could sense the hostility. When Billy eventually demanded a divorce, Anne staunchly refused, and in that refusal lay the core of her insecurities. She had worked too long, clawed her way too far, to give up the prestige and financial security of being a Woodward. Yet for all her outward glitz, designer gowns, sparkling jewels, and carefully cultivated social graces, Anne was unraveling inside. The strain of trying to please Billy, the animosity from his mother, and her lack of genuine allies among the high society set weighed heavily. At some point, she began to rely on alcohol and prescription pills, a secret coping mechanism that only escalated her personal turmoil. The more she felt alienated, the more she seemed to cling to the illusions of luxury, purchasing expensive clothes and jetting off to Europe, even when her finances were precarious. Billy's mother, Elizabeth, had openly declared Anne a pariah, ensuring that she was excluded from certain events. No matter how many times Anne traveled abroad or attended exclusive gatherings, her hope of ever truly being embraced by the Manhattan elite seemed to slip further away. In Europe, Anne tried to reinvent herself yet again, hobnobbing with international circles who might not have heard the unsavory gossip back home. But the illusions never lasted. She returned periodically, each time stepping into a fortress of scrutiny and whispers. Adding to her misery, Elizabeth Woodward was controlling her children's upbringing. The two boys, raised under the strict watch of their grandmother, grew distant from Anne. Perhaps Elizabeth considered Anne unfit, or maybe she just wanted to keep the Woodward legacy unsullied by someone she deemed unworthy. Whatever the rationale, it deepened the anguish that Anne, for all her ambition and cunning, was also a mother. Having her children effectively taken from her must have been a wound that never quite healed. By the mid-1950s, the precarious facade of Anne's social standing was crumbling. She'd fought so hard for acceptance and had glimpsed a rarefied realm that only a handful of people in the world would ever see. But now, rumors churned incessantly. Talk of her marriage to Billy nearing collapse, whispers of her mental state deteriorating, all manner of speculation about whether she might vanish from New York's high society altogether. Her finances, which had once seemed boundless, were now rumored to be shaky. She tried to keep up appearances, but behind the scenes, she was teetering on the brink of total ruin. Yet just when everything seemed poised for disaster, an event dangled the promise of rejuvenation. The Duke of Windsor, the once King Edward VIII, who'd abdicated the British throne for Wallis Simpson, planned a glamorous party. Through some combination of social connections, Anne and Billy found themselves on the guest list. In theory, it could be a chance to stand shoulder to shoulder with aristocracy, an evening that might restore a bit of her battered prestige. The date was a fateful late October 1955. Anne put on her best smile and a dazzling gown, determined to prove to the world, and perhaps to Billy, that she was still every inch the sophisticated Woodward wife worthy of high society. But that night ended in unimaginable tragedy. After returning home from the Duke's party, Anne claimed she heard suspicious noises. The dog was barking, and just earlier, Billy had mentioned rumors of burglaries in their affluent neighborhood. Adrenaline coursing through her, she grabbed a shotgun that was reportedly kept near her bed for protection. The details get murky here. People would speculate for decades about what exactly transpired in that house. But Anne's version is that she came across a silhouette in the dark near Billy's door and fired before confirming the identity. In a split second, with a shotgun blast reverberating through the night, she realized she had shot her husband. Billy Woodward Jr. died almost immediately. Anne, hysterical, claimed over and over that she believed she was defending herself from an intruder. At 2:35 a.m., she called the police in a panic, repeating that she didn't realize it was Billy until it was too late. You can imagine the police arriving, the flickering lights across the driveway, the swirl of confusion as they discovered the wealthy heir's lifeless body, and Anne trembling, clutching the phone, evidently sedated soon after. From the start, the rumor mill went berserk. Was this a calculated murder so she could keep the Woodward fortune? Was it a crime of passion following a marital quarrel? Or was it genuinely a tragic accident by someone living in a state of paranoia and marital misery? A grand jury convened, and Anne was thrust into a trial by public opinion well before any legal conclusion. Her personal history became fodder for newspapers. The showgirl background, the gold digger accusations, the open hostility with Billy, the possible extramarital affairs. The press was relentless, calling it the shooting of the century and painting her in the worst possible light. In the official legal process, though, after only a short deliberation, about 30 minutes, the jury decided there was insufficient evidence for a murder charge. They accepted her story that she was protecting herself from a presumed burglar. The law, at least, granted her freedom. But freedom came at a steep price. Elizabeth Woodward, Billy's mother, had always despised Anne. Now, with her son dead, she wasted no time making sure Anne was effectively forced out of New York, out of the Woodward family sphere, and out of any illusions that she could keep living among the city's aristocracy. Whether people believed her story or not, the verdict in the court of social standing was unanimous. She was persona non grata. So Anne retreated to Europe once more, carrying the weight of this scandal on her shoulders. She tried to maintain some semblance of her old lifestyle, but the money was dwindling. Her mother-in-law relentlessly contested any financial claims Anne made on the Woodward estate. Even across the Atlantic, her name was drenched in notorious gossip. The occasional suitors or flirtations she entertained only fueled the rumor that she had become a desperate woman seeking any wealthy anchor to remain afloat. Meanwhile, she missed her sons terribly. They were mostly under Elizabeth's guardianship, tucked away in boarding schools. Anne's contact with them was sporadic at best. This added heartbreak only compounded her sense of loss. People close to her said she struggled with severe anxiety and continued to rely on alcohol and pills, the vices that had once provided a brief escape, but were now devouring her from within. Years dragged on like this, floating in Europe, occasionally popping back across the Atlantic for a short time, but never shaking the cloud of suspicion. Truman Capote, once a social confidant to many wealthy women, the Swans, had his own complicated ties to Anne. Known for his razor-sharp wit and insatiable appetite for scandal, he was working on a novel that would fictionalize and sensationalize the lives of his high society acquaintances, including Anne's. By the mid-1970s, Capote was teasing excerpts from his forthcoming answered prayers, letting slip that one chapter or short story, possibly titled La Côte Basque, took aim at a thinly veiled version of Anne. He mockingly referred to her as Mrs. Bang Bang, referencing the lethal rumor that she would shoot first and ask questions later. Another rumored nickname was Lady Marmalade, an insinuation of some humiliating bedroom anecdote. If the tabloids of the day were to be believed, Capote's portrayal wasn't just an unflattering cameo. It was a planned evisceration of everything Anne had tried to maintain about her reputation. Essentially, it threatened to tear open old wounds, reaffirmed the narrative that she had deliberately killed her husband, and drag her name through the mud once again. She learned about this forthcoming portrayal in 1975. By then, she was already in a fragile mental state, her resources dwindling, her connections shaky at best. The knowledge that Capote was about to fling her darkest secrets onto a public stage was, by many accounts, the final blow. That October, Anne overdosed on cyanide pills, ending her life in a solitary final act. She was found lifeless, an empty bottle, possibly a note, though accounts differ on whether she left a written message. Either way, the tragedy was absolute. At the time, many believed it was her last resort to avoid further shame. Elizabeth Woodward, when informed, reportedly commented something chilling along the lines of, "She shot my son, and Truman just murdered her. So I suppose we don't have to worry about that anymore." That statement alone captures the coldness that had always existed between them, an unbridgeable gulf that, in Elizabeth's eyes, ended only in Anne's death. If that wasn't enough sadness, consider what became of Anne's sons. Jimmy, the younger, had his own battles with substance abuse and depression, going so far as attempting to take his life in 1972 by jumping off a building. He survived, but with severe injuries. The older son, Woody, eventually succumbed to his own demons and died by suicide in 1999. The entire family saga echoed a Greek tragedy, a cursed lineage that saw every key figure meet a dark end. As for Capote, his excerpt that attacked Mrs. Bang Bang burned what few social bridges he still had. The same upper crust set that once adored him turned their backs as they realized none of them were safe from his poison pen. Ostracized and caught in his own cycle of substance abuse, he died in 1984, haunted by the realization that he might have done irreparable harm to people he once called friends, including Ann. In the end, that group of swans, married to wealthy magnates and adored by paparazzi, began to dwindle, and the entire era lost its luster. Ann Woodward is often labeled the ultimate swan because her story so perfectly encapsulates the mesmerizing glow of upper crust life and the devastating consequences lurking beneath that polish. She soared higher than her modest Kansas upbringing might have ever predicted, rubbing shoulders with duchesses and millionaires. Yet that social climb rested on fragile illusions. She stood on a precarious perch, attacked and ridiculed by those who saw her as a cheap interloper. She fought for acceptance with every ounce of energy she had, only to realize that her best efforts could not surmount the fortress of prejudice and old money that surrounded her. One shotgun blast unraveled everything: her life of illusions, her tenuous marriage, her last shred of acceptance. From that moment on, it was as if her life had been sealed off behind a blood-stained door. Ann Woodward's story is a haunting reminder of how fast the world of wealth, fame, and beauty can turn cruel. Her determination to be someone brought her all the way to the top, but it also left her isolated, vilified, and eventually broken. In the end, her life was defined not by the glittering parties she once attended, but by the shot that echoed through decades of tragedy. What do you think of Ann Woodward's story? Was she a victim of society or a woman undone by her own choices? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true tales of fame, fortune, and downfall. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.